Hello there, I'm your host Peter Strachan. Welcome to Stockhead's RockTalk. With the Brent oil price above $90 a barrel or $135 Australian a barrel, and fuel prices at the bows are now around $2 a litre, the impetus to change to lower energy cost electric vehicles has never been stronger. To bring us up to date with new developments in the electric vehicle transport space and the impact that could have on the demand for lithium and other battery metals, while taking a look at the market leader Tesla, we are delighted to welcome back the Managing Director of Impact Energy Consultancy, Pete Petrovsky. Peter is active in the committee of the Tesla Owners Club in WA and runs a business implementing power grids that incorporate rebuildable energy and is the font of all knowledge on Tesla's electric vehicles in general and cryptocurrencies in his spare time. I urge subscribers to search the Stockhead website for Peter's past appearances. As we hurtle towards a world where cars will no longer be internal combustion engine, but will be electric by choice for safety, for ease of use and cost of ownership, I'm sure that Stockhead subscribers are keen to be kept up to date with the technical and commercial developments. Welcome, Pete. Pete, when we spoke last September, Australia's luxury car tax was a sore point. Has there been any softening by the government or recognition that this is not such a good idea?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for having me back. No, unfortunately not. There's been radio silence on the luxury car tax, unfortunately, which is a real shame because effectively it's a tax on innovation, a tax on safety, and it's just an unnecessary, another unnecessary hurdle. You know, we're taxing EVs while incentivizing fossil fuels, so surely that's got to change.
Last time we spoke, we also spoke about the sales of electric vehicles in Australia and globally. And I'm sure subscribers will have noticed that when they go down to their local shopping centre or just drive around towns, they're bumping into a lot more Teslas than even 3 or 4 or 6 months ago. And I know that Tesla's last quarter showed sales of just under 1 million units. Do you have any update on what's going on globally and in Australia?
Yes, so when we got our Tesla Model 3 back in September of 2019, we'd be lucky to see a Tesla around Perth in WA, one every couple of months. And now it's impossible not to see one as soon as you're in the car for longer than about 10 or 15 minutes. So the numbers have really grown. So yes, Tesla delivered 936,000 cars in 2021. So that's a doubling of their production or their deliveries from the year before. It's quite a incredible feat. When we think of the EV market in general globally, it may not be that obvious at the moment, but if we look back at 2021, maybe 5 to 10 years from now, we'll be able to see that 2021 was a transformational, a pivotal year for EVs. So there was about 6.6 million EVs sold in 2021 globally. That represents about 8.57% market share, roughly, which is about 108% higher than the year before. So the year before was about 4.2% market share. Now, look, people will argue and say, yes, but you're coming off a low base, and that's fair enough. But that argument would have been you would have given even more weight to that argument a year ago when the numbers were even lower. But last year, the increase was 42% from the year before and 9% the year before that.
It's exponential growth.
It's the beginning, yes. It's the beginning of the exponential part of the S-curve. So if you were to average out the growth in EVs globally between 2014 or 2015 and, let's say, 2019, 2020, it ranged between 9 and about 69%, with an average of about 50% per year. So for about 4 or 5 years, we were growing at about 50%. And then last year, we grew at 108%. So, we saw a similar thing happen in Norway. And, once you're at close to 10% market share, to get to 50%, especially if you're growing by 100% per year, you'll be there in 2 to 3 years' time. But even if we were to go back to the 50% a year growth rate, it'll be 3 to 4 years before, half of all new car sales in the world are electric vehicles or plug-in vehicles of some type.
Pete, we're seeing all the auto marques are now advertising the new models or the models that they expect to bring forward this calendar year. What new auto marques are you seeing that are going to be ready for the Australian market, and how will they compete with the status quo that really revolves around ongoing service charges to be sustainable?
Look, a lot of the legacy automakers are now in panic mode. And, 2021, one of the new things that happened this year was, yes, the advertising that legacy automakers are doing around EVs. To answer your question, look, we've got the, Hyundai Ioniq 5 coming to Australia, or, in Australia in extremely low numbers at the moment. The Kia EV6, which is being advertised on TV as well. There's BYD, there's lots of other cars, but really, you can't talk about EVs in Australia without talking about Tesla. So last year, or in 2021, they commanded a close to 60% market share of all EVs, which means Tesla sold more EVs in Australia than all the other car makers combined. And, that percentage is even higher in their home market. In the US, it's around 70%. Globally, it's around 14%, with China accounting for 53% of all new global sales. But yeah, look, going forward, it's hard to see. Australia, we've got about 2% of our new car sales are EVs. In the US, it's about 4.5%. As I said, globally, it's 8.57%. It was really interesting to see Pete Buttigieg, the transport secretary in the US, on CNBC last week. It was quite interesting to see the sense of urgency that he had in his tone when talking about EVs. And he made the point that, it's not a question of if we're going to shift to EVs, it's whether we can get there fast enough. So he's referring to the US being behind China and the rest of the world in terms of EV market share. Now, our market share is half that of the US in Australia, and there's just no sense of urgency in Australia here at all, unfortunately, which is a real shame, because we've got all the resources here to be able to, bring back the auto manufacturing industry in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the best sort of advertising for electric vehicles is that people see them on the roads, no matter what they are, whether it's a BMW or the Tesla or whatever, and they say, okay, well, these guys, I better buy one. My next car is going to be an electric vehicle.
It's hilarious. So a friend of mine from the kids' school, so he had his heart set on buying a 3 Series BMW, which prior to the Model 3 was the best-selling luxury sedan in the world. And he was researching, for 2 or 3 years, and he had his heart set on it. And, I've just been telling him about my car. We've been carpooling, so he's seen my car around quite a bit. You start asking a few questions, and I get the phone call out of the blue saying, what's the chance of taking your car for a drive? So there I am sitting in his driveway, and his neighbour comes across the road and says, "Oh, have you bought a Tesla?" And I said, No, I'm just taking a friend's car for a drive. And then he said, "Oh, you know what they say about these cars?" And I haven't heard this prior to that point either. And neither did my friend. And he said, What did they say? And he said, well, if you don't want to buy a Tesla, you don't sit in one. That's so true. So we had a car that we lent to my sister-in-law. She took it to work, and, there's a sale that came out of that. A client of mine saw mine, so she ended up ordering one, and now her neighbours ordered one. And it just spreads like wildfires, because, it really is a superior product. Whether you're referring, it's the safest car in the world. You can't argue about the green credentials of the car. I mean, the acceleration, the instant torque of an electric motor is just unbeatable. The convenience is incredible, and the total cost of ownership. So really, there's really only 2 things that you could argue now in terms of an EV versus an internal combustion engine car, where you could say that an EV like a Tesla is, is not superior. So those would be the time to charge and the cost, or the sticker price. So the sticker price, I published a article recently where I showed that in Australia, if, let's say, Peter, you were to go out tomorrow and buy a Tesla Model 3, and your neighbour buys an average Australian petrol car, internal combustion engine car, that costs roughly around $41,000, $42,000 in Australia at the moment. And let's say you take everything into account. So obviously the upfront cost, and that will be higher for a Tesla Model 3. So your finance costs will be higher, your interest costs. So we're including that as well. But let's say you include things like, so obviously we've got, insurance, registration, cost of fuel. We've got depreciation. We've got servicing and maintenance. You take all that into account. And let's say you sell both cars after just 3 years. Obviously, the longer you hold on to your Model 3, the better off you'll be. But let's say both of you sell your cars after 3 years. You'll have at least $12,500 more left in your bank account than your neighbour. And that's quite incredible. So yes, the sticker price is higher, but you need to look at it in terms of the total cost of ownership. A bit like solar, you wouldn't just look at the sticker price of a solar system, which may cost several thousands of dollars versus, 29 cents for a kilowatt hour of electricity. So that's quite interesting. The other part is, the time to refuel. So that's not really, that really only comes into the equation, and it's not obvious unless you've owned an EV for a number of years, but that doesn't really come into the equation unless you're going on to very long drives. And by very long, I mean, driving the car for longer than 4 hours at a time. The government suggests that you take a break every 2 hours, but, if you, had the desire to drive longer than 4 hours, yes, with an EV, you'll have to pull over. So look, with the spread of Tesla superchargers and other fast DC chargers, the Western Australian government and other state governments around Australia have pledged funds for expanding the EV network. So, with a V3 or version 3 supercharger, you can recharge 300 kilometres in about 12 to 15 minutes. So, basically in the time that it takes to go to the loo or grab a cup of coffee.
When you just do a 40-kilometre daily commute, so how many kilowatt hours would you need to do that, and how long would that take to charge up on your home charging system?
It would take about anywhere, depending on how you drive and what car you drive, but anywhere between about 7 and 10 kilowatt hours. And look, 40 kilometres, the Tesla high-powered wall connector, which is the standard home charger, that charges between 70 and 80 kilometres an hour. But it's not really irrelevant. And the reason being is, so Tesla developed a battery swapping station, which they had installed between LA and San Francisco in 2013, and they were able to swap a battery in 90 seconds. Interestingly, they got rid of it a couple of years ago because there wasn't that much demand for it, and they couldn't work out. Initially, they couldn't work out why. Then they realised that Tesla or EV drivers are spoiled. Why would you? It's a bit like owning your smartphone. So, if you could recharge your smartphone in 2 seconds, would you drive to the next shopping centre to go and recharge it? No, you wouldn't. You just plug it in at home. And that's what they found that most people were doing. They were just plugging their cars in overnight. So when I wake up in the morning, my car's got 10 days worth of driving at the average 40 kilometres a day for an average Australian. So, when it comes to, and I only charge to 80%, if I was to charge to 100%, it'd be, 12, 13 days. So, it's much, charging is actually much more convenient with an EV because you don't have to, leave home to go and charge somewhere else.
So, Pete, what part do you think China will play in the overall electric vehicle market? They seem to be pretty dominant. Teslas are made there. A lot of other companies are making their cars in China.
Look, yes, China is a huge market. It accounted for 53% of the global EV sales in 2021. A lot of those sales have been spread among a huge number of different EV makers. But, Tesla's been huge in the Chinese market as they've been everywhere else around the world. But yes, China is going to be incredibly important. You can't discount a region that accounts for more than half of all EV sales.
Pete, since we last spoke in September 21, the price of lithium carbonate has tripled to around $60 a kilogram and is up fivefold since the lows we saw in 2020. Now, car makers are now reaching down through the supply chain to shore up access to lithium, to nickel, to cobalt and other materials. Putting your old stockbroker's hat on, how do you see this playing out for local mining companies?
You would be better positioned to answer that question than me, Peter. But in terms of the EV manufacturers, it's going to come down to pricing power and whether you have the ability to pass on those cost increases to your customer. Once again, I would argue there's no one better positioned to do that than Tesla. I mean, they've demonstrated in the US, for example, the Tesla Model 3 has had 10 price increases so far. And it's $1,000 or a couple of $1,000s at a time, but it hasn't. While they've been increasing the price of the Model 3, the waiting time has extended. So even at the higher price levels, the demand is absolutely there, and that's while they've increased their production by close to 90% year on year. So they've sold twice as many cars, and they'll. Elon said on the Q1 earnings call that they expect the growth rates to be comfortably above 50% next year. So, barring another COVID type event. So, as Tesla really is in the box seat. So, if we have inflation or the cost of materials keeps on rising, Tesla is able to pass on that cost. Whereas a lot of other car manufacturers, especially the legacy car manufacturers, if they're breaking even on EVs, they're doing extremely well. Most of them are losing money. And not only are they losing money on their EVs, they're cannibalizing their internal combustion engine sales, which are making them money. So, they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. And on top of all that, they're now seeing the shift to EVs being unavoidable. So they're panicking and they're advertising and they're panicking into selling more EVs at the cost of internal combustion engine cars. It's a really hard spot for legacy automakers to be in.
Yeah, so Pete, can we quickly turn our attention to the Australia's electric grid network? We've heard a lot about how Australians are big adopters of solar photovoltaic on their roofs, probably more than any other part of the world, and not surprisingly, given how sunny many places in Australia are. But this is putting a lot of pressure on the electric grid because during the middle of the day, no one wants to draw power from the grid, and they're pushing back and charging people and saying we won't take your power off your roof and so forth. What part do you think electric vehicles can play in harvesting that surplus power in the middle of the day as people are at work, they can plug in and to stabilise the grid?
I would say a critical part. So EVs really are the answer to what's been called a network operator death spiral. So obviously as you have more solar come into the grid, you're getting to spread your network costs across less and less kilowatt hours or units of electricity that you're selling. So you either need to increase the price or do something. So, but as you increase the price, that introduces a feedback loop where it makes solar more interesting. What retailers have done previously or historically is they've increased the daily supply charge, which is irrespective of how much power you consume. That's just a daily charge that you pay to your retailer. So in Western Australia, that's gone up fivefold to about $1 a day now. And it's reaching a point, if you get too hot, any higher than that, you're going to really start incentivizing people to get off the grid completely and invest in batteries. Interesting you say, what you said about the grid. So in Western Australia, we've on Sunday, 14th of February, Western Australia brought in, or the Southwest Interconnected System at least, which is the lower part of WA, brought in emergency solar management measures where if you install a system now that's less than 5 kilowatts and presumably larger systems later on, you have to give Western Power, the network operator here, the ability to switch your solar system and turn it off and turn its ability to produce solar. The reason for that is, so our grid was designed to work anywhere between about 1,000 megawatts and 4,000 megawatts. Now, with a lot of that solar coming into the grid, as you said, in the middle of the day, the load on the network has been reaching new record lows, most recently about 650 megawatts. Now, there's some debate as to where the bottom level is, but everyone agrees that there's a level below which the network becomes unstable. So, unfortunately, we had to resort to these sort of measures because we haven't kept up with firming up renewables. So we haven't kept up with investing in batteries. And the longer we drag our feet with this, the more draconian measures we'll have to introduce, such as this one. But getting back to EVs, that's really the only answer to this whole question. So we mentioned at the top of the show that the average Australian drives about 40 kilometres a day. That's between 7 and 10 kilowatt hours a day. The average family in Australia, in WA, uses roughly around 20 kilowatt hours a day. So, if you replace 2 internal combustion cars with 2 EVs, you've doubled your load. So that's got to be, that's got to be the answer. And as we get vehicle to grid technology come to the market in the next few years, and there's already some manufacturers that are introducing that now, you'll have the ability to soak up that excess free energy produced by the sun during the middle of the day and discharge it at the end of the day when demand is the highest.
Yeah, and you can get a premium price for it. Pete, that's fantastic. So many questions and not enough time for all the answers, I'm afraid, but we'll get you back in again in another couple of months, and I'm sure the numbers will continue to go parabolic, as you say. So thanks for coming in to Stockhead today, and we'll look forward to talking to you again through the year.
Thanks again. Thanks very much for having me on, Peter.